I don't think I need to explain to anybody in this room that the landscape of America has changed pretty dramatically over the last 20, 30 years. Now, where you used to see billboards that were advertising things like family businesses, restaurants, today we see billboards that are actively promoting atheism. Buses rolling by and say, there's probably no God, but stop worrying and enjoy your life. In fact, entire campaigns have been taken out trying to teach people that, quote, all religions are fairy tales. This is the America that our kids or grandkids are growing up in, and it is drastically different than the America that many of you in this room remember. But I want you to understand this did not happen just overnight. In fact, if we were to go back roughly 50 years ago, Time magazine asked the question, is God dead? Basically kind of planting that seed, that idea that, there's not really God. We just need to do our own thing. Fast forward to the year 2009, Newsweek cover story issue on the fall of Christian America. Cover story. In fact, just a couple of short years ago, Richard Dawkins, famous atheist, he made the statement, he said, God is dead, and it was science that killed him. Now, I need you to understand, he was not the first to make that brash declaration. In fact, if you go back to the 1800s, it was a philosopher by the name of Friedrich Nietzsche that made that same statement, that God is dead. Let me give you a little update on Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche is dead. God is not. And yet, again, it's in this culture that many of our children, grandchildren, they're growing up, they're looking around, and the worldview that they're developing doesn't have God as a part of it. Some of you may be thinking, okay, but you can kind of be neutral to the idea of God. You can kind of be, before we go there, let me share with you just how vitriolic it's become. This is the March 2006 issue of Discover magazine, where they were making fun of anybody that might believe in an intelligent designer. Now, stop and think with me for just a moment. If there is design, there must, by definition, be a what? Designer. It's in this issue that they make this claim. They say, there's news for intelligent designers and the rest of us to ponder. We humans, in all life on Earth, may have well evolved from the most unintelligent entities one can imagine. Genetic shards do nothing but copy themselves. We're nobody's great idea. We are the fortunate mistakes of countless biochemical morons. That's evolution. Tumbling was somehow comforting. Now, I don't know about you this morning, I don't find that very comforting. But when you really stop and think about it for just a moment, there are really only two options. Either you and I are here on this earth, we have a purpose, there is a God, a designer, or you're just a fortunate mistake of countless biochemical morons. You are just the product of random atoms colliding together and what they would say millions or billions of years. Now, as you look at those two very opposing worldviews, I want you to ask yourself a simple question. What is the only legal theory for origins that we're teaching in most of the textbooks today? You don't have to answer. I actually brought some examples. For instance, this is a Hardcore Race textbook. It says humans probably evolved from bacteria that lived more than 4 billion years ago. Or how about this one? Prentice Hall textbook. used extensively here in the Southeast, where they're making the claim that we evolved from some ape-like creature. Or how about this one? This is a biology book put out by Harrub and Camp. Notice what I highlighted in this one. It says, by the second month, the fetus looks from the outside like a tiny normal baby. But it's not. And folks, ask yourself this question. Why would we be teaching high school students that a 7-month-old in the womb is not a human child? Because let's be real for just a minute. In most cases, 7 months is viable. In fact, there may be people in this room who were premature babies. 7 months, yeah. But let me share with you what I consider to be the evil of marketing for just a moment. Take a look at the picture that's associated with that statement. Any lady in this room who is giving birth will tell you very quickly that's not a 7-month-old in the womb. Because by 7 months, that is doing comics, okay? And here's the thing, if they can get our kids to associate that statement with that picture, it makes abortion a whole lot easier. And it also devalues life. Would you look at it and you say, okay, Brad, I hear what you're saying, but that doesn't really affect my kids. That's just a science textbook. Doesn't affect our community. Certainly doesn't affect my child's religion. Oh, really? Let's go a little deeper. Let's take a look at a more modern textbook, one that is currently being used extensively here in the United States. Notice this is a chapter on genetics and evolution. The very first sentence has what I have come to expect in basically most science textbooks, the idea that we've all evolved from a common ancestor. But what you may not be expecting is when you turn the page and they start taking shots at the Bible. For instance, next page says the mythology of most peoples includes a story explaining the appearance of humans on Earth. The account of creation recorded in Genesis in the Bible, for example, explains human origins. So they already plant the seed that this is just a myth. Then later on in that chapter, they've got a picture of the Tower of Babel. Now again, let me remind you, this is a science textbook in a chapter on genetics and evolution. And yet, look at the caption. It says, the unfinished Tower of Babel, described in the first book of the Bible, symbolizes an ancient West Asian, what's the next word? Myth about the origins of language diversity. Folks, they're not only just teaching a godless theory anymore. At this point, they're actively undermining their faith. You say, okay, I hear, I see what you're saying, but again, how does that affect me? How does that affect our culture? Well, ask yourself, what happens to a community? What happens to a country when you take God out of the picture? Take it back a couple hundred years to a time where this country was growing, we were spreading out, they were putting these little schoolhouse buildings around. Some of you in this room are little house on the prairie fans. So I want you to think back to those days for just a moment and ask yourself, why did we start public schools in America? Like legally, why did we do that? There's a law that is on the books, and I challenge you, take a look at it. The name of the law is actually called the Old Deluder Satan Law. Listen to what it said. It being one chief point of that old deluder, Satan, to keep men from the knowledge of scriptures as in former times, by keeping them in an unknown tongue. So in these later times, by persuading them from the use of tongues, that so at last the true sense and the meaning of the original, might be clouded by false glosses of saint-seeming deceivers. That learning might not be buried in the graves of our fathers, church and commonwealth. The Lord assisting our endeavors, it is therefore resolved that after the Lord increase the settlement to the number of 50 households, they shall therewith appoint one within their town to teach all such children as to resort to him to write and read. It is further ordered that where any town shall increase to the number of 100 families or households, they shall set up a grammar school. Why did we set up public schools? So that we could not be deceived by that old deluder Satan. So that we could read the Bible on our own and discover the truth. And as a result, most of the early textbooks, not only did they mention God, actually had lessons about it. This is a McGuffey reader written many, many years ago by this guy, William McGuffey. Millions of these were used in schools. You open up, for instance, say that the first, the second reader. Here's the second reader. Take a look at the table of contents. Look at the ones I've highlighted for just a moment. Top of the page says, praise to God, how the world was made, the Lord's Prayer, the 10 Commandments, about using profane language. Anybody think we could use a lesson or two on profanity today? Yeah. The third reading, they actually had a lesson on the goodness of God. Touch not, taste not, handle not. Notice this, they had a lesson on the gospel invitation in a public textbook. And yet today, we've gone from the old deluder Satan law to sponsoring Satan clubs after school. Anybody see the problem? Yeah, there's a huge problem. Basically, what they're doing is they're trying to eradicate any notion of God. You say, Brad, why would you say there's a bullseye on Christianity? Well, consider for just a moment what we're seeing. For instance, students who are being failed, not because they do poorly in school, not because they don't show up, but because they refuse to conform to that professor's anti-Christian bias. Or how about Blue's Clues, Peppa Pig? Some of you in this room have children who watch these shows on a regular basis. Are you aware that they've gotten woke to the point where just this last year, Blue's Clues, not only did they have a gay parade, they actually had a transgender parade marshal for that parade. What about cereal companies? You know, when I was young, cereal companies, they would put a little prize in the bottom of the box. Today, they're encouraging folks to choose their own pronoun. Pixar, Disney, they got in on the act. So what we're seeing, quite literally, is a battle that is going on during our lifetime. Some of you recognize the name James Dobson. He wrote a book several years ago titled Children at Risk. I want you to listen to what he said. Nothing short of great civil war values rages today throughout North America. So two sides with vastly differing and incompatible worldviews are locked in a bitter conflict that permeates every level of society. He's right. But I want you to notice he wrote that 34 years ago. Anybody think maybe the battle has gotten even bigger since then? Yeah, well, let me just kind of bring you into it. Many of you grew up learning your letters, your colors, watching a television show called Sesame Street. And yet today, Sesame Street has joined hands with the LGBT agenda. Or how about politicians who are teaching their candidates, their folks out in the world, that having a married couple, a mom and dad, is dangerous for kids and un-American. Well, folks, before we go any further, let me just ask you this. Who instituted marriage? God did. You know what that means? It's good. You got professors of theology that are teaching that Jesus was a drag king with queer desires. You got California putting forth a bill that would make pedophilia not a crime, but a sexual orientation. Now, why is that a big deal? I realize most people, I'm from the South, I'm a Middle Tennessee, and a lot of times when people talk about California, we just look over there and think, that's the land of the fruit and the nuts. Well, guess what? They're moving this way. And guess what? What happens there eventually makes its way to places like Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia. If this thing passes, here's what it ultimately means. It means that they could drive school buses, work in daycare centers, teach in the classroom, because after all, it's not a crime, it's how they identify. Facebook telling us there's 59 possible genders out there. Now, my question would be, why stop at 59? Drag queen story that is coming to libraries near you. By the way, if you don't think that this is real, Clarksville, Tennessee, just up the road from where I live, they've already had 3 of these. Targeting young people to come and listen to a book that is basically promoting the transgender lifestyle. Or how about Barbie dolls? Some of you grew up playing with it. Today, we can't have Barbie dolls. We've got to have gender-neutral dolls. In fact, we got transgender play figurines. We got books targeting toddlers. I'm talking about children that can't really even walk yet, that are promoting this idea that gender is fluid, that you can be whatever you think. Now, if you're sitting there right now thinking it's not that bad, please understand my background is science. I deal with numbers, data. 4,000% increase in kids identifying as transgender. 4,000% increase in 2018. If that doesn't wake you up, in 2007, there was a single clinic in the United States that would perform sex change surgeries on minors. 1. Today, there's over 50. Now, folks, let me just tell you, that right there is child abuse. Amen. And yet, we're practicing it in our culture today. How do you have morals? How do you teach character in a situation where God has been removed? I want you to read a quote with me. This is from one of the signers of our Declaration of Independence, a guy by the name of Benjamin Rush. I want you to listen to what he said about having God and the Bible, or God and education, together. He said the only foundation for a useful education in a republic is to be laid in religion. He said without this, there can be no virtue. Without virtue, there can be no liberty. Liberty is the object in the life of all republican governments. He says without religion, I believe learning does much mischief to the morals and the principles of mankind. He's right. What I want us to do is to have a history lesson. Because I'm one of those guys that firmly believes if you don't learn from history, what are you bound to do? You're going to repeat it. Now, I could start my history lesson way back. I could go all the way back to 1859 when a guy by the name of Charles Darwin, he wrote a little book some of you may have heard about called The Origin of Species. But as I'm looking at you, I don't think anybody in this room was around in 1859. Or we can go to 1925, Scott's monkey tribe. But again, I don't think any of you in this room were around in 1925. I want to start during the lifetime of people in this room. We'll start about the 1950s, when the government got involved in the topic of man's origins. They formed the National Science Foundation. Those of you who were living in the 50s, you may remember racing the Russians to space. In 1957, we got beat by Sputnik. The Russians, they launched a satellite, and all of a sudden there was lots of fear. What does this mean? Are they going to put lasers on it? And there was lots of pressure to produce better scientists in America. In fact, President Eisenhower's advisors came to him and they said, look, we got to revamp the way we're teaching science. We got to throw out God, creation. We got to go with what these other countries are using. We got to use evolution. They based their recommendation on 3 countries: Germany, China, and Russia. Not exactly the most moral countries to follow. But let me share with you what happened. In 1959, Eisenhower asked Congress for $1 billion to revamp the way we were teaching human origins. And he got it. And I want you to watch the dominoes start falling right after that. That was in 1959. By 1962, the Supreme Court said, no more prayer school. And so a lot of you that I'm looking at, you went to school originally, there were prayers at the beginning of the day, and then maybe you went through this period where there was a moment of silence. You remember that? The Supreme Court said, no more prayer. The very next year, Madeleine Murray O'Hair, some of you remember that name, she successfully kicked Bible reading out of the classroom. And so, at the same time we're rejecting this godless theory, we're also simultaneously removing God, prayer, and Bible. In fact, by 1968, in this state, Arkansas was told, you must teach human evolution. You don't have a choice. The very next year, 1969, we passed the no-fault divorce law. Oh, why is that a big deal? Why does that matter? That's a big deal because prior to this, believe it or not, it actually used to be hard to get a divorce in America. It actually required, in most states, a calendar year, and it had to be one of the 3 A's: abuse, abandonment, or adultery. Those were the only 3 things that you could get a divorce for. When they passed this right here, that means you could get a divorce for anything. Somebody burns the biscuits, you get a divorce. And you say, okay, Brett, why would you bring that into the discussion of this, science and evolution? I'll tell you why. Because, folks, if you want to tear down the nation, you don't start in Washington, D.C. You start at home. You want to tear down a country? You break one of the foundational pillars of the home. You say, okay, but still, why does all this matter? Folks, it matters because what you believe about where you came from dictates your behavior. Now, I'm going to prove that to you with data, but I need you to understand, if you grew up thinking that you were created in the image and likeness of God, you are more likely to behave differently than if you think you're just some cosmological accident. Just the unfortunate mistake of countless biochemical morons. Adolf Hitler made a statement and he said, "Let me control the textbooks and I will control the state." Now that ought to be a little chilling to some of you in this room. And think about the textbooks we're using today. What are the results of this history lesson? I'm going to use 1963 as kind of my landmark year because remember, Eisenhower asked for the money in 1959. It usually takes about 4 years once you make that financial request to actually get it into the textbooks in front of kids. And by 1963, we got all prayer and Bible reading. Did we get evolution in the textbooks? Oh yeah, in a huge way. It went from being just something that was casually referenced to being a core tenet of most science textbooks. And not just science textbooks now. It's in history, math, social studies, you name it. But folks, here's the problem. We started reaping other fruits from this that we weren't expecting. Like, for instance, the percentage of teenage girls having premarital sex has gone up in every age category since 1963. If you look at my graph for just a moment, you'll notice there's an orange bar. I put that there to represent the year 1963. You'll see it in a couple of graphs. So prior to that, over here, we're still telling people, hey, there's a God, you were created by God. Over here, you're just the fortunate mistake of countless biochemical morons. Now, as a symptom of this one, sexually transmitted diseases, notice this, in children ages 10 to 14, up 385% since 1963. Birth rates for unwed girls ages 15 to 19, up 200% since 1963. Ironically, pregnancies in that same category are up 553%. And you look at me and say, hold on, time out, Brad, man, your math doesn't jive. How can pregnancies be up 553%, but births are only up 200%? Well, that would be because in 1973, we legalized abortion, right? Roe v. Wade. Which meant a pregnancy was no longer automatically equal to a birth. In fact, out of wedlock births as a percentage of all births has gone up every single year since 1963. In fact, let me just update my graph for you. As of December last year, 43% of children born in this country go home to one parent. 43%, folks. Now, I tell you that for two reasons. Number one, because God had a plan for the family unit. Amen? Number two, you ever notice what happens when you take a dad out of the home? Folks, take a look. 63% of the young people who are killing themselves coming from homes without a father. 71% of high school dropouts coming from homes without a father. 85% of the young people in prison right now as I'm talking to you coming from homes without a dad. How about this one? Young people living together has gone up 725% since 1963. Anybody think divorce has gone up? Oh yeah. You pass the no-fault divorce law, it's going to skyrocket. Now, some of you may be looking at my graph saying, hey, wait, it's getting better. It's kind of tapering off down here. Yeah, well, before you start celebrating and bringing out the banners, please understand, the only reason the divorce rate is dropping in America is because our kids aren't getting married, they're shacking up. How about this one? Violent crime in the United States up 995% since 1963. I'm going to do something real quick just for fun. How many of you in this room remember growing up and not locking the door to your house? The young people are like, are you serious? We got like ring doorbells and cameras and bolts. And this is a quote from the LA Times. Take a look. It says that most of Oakland Unified School District's 92 schools, the fight against crime and violence was unending. An Uzi semi-automatic rifle with 15 hollow point bullets was among weapons confiscated by district officials within the last year. Franklin Elementary School, trying to ensure the students know to hit the ground when bullets fly, did carry out shooting drills twice a year. Shooting drills. Folks, let me make sure you understand. This is not about politics at all. But I need you to know something. There are people in this room that used to go to school with guns in the back of their truck, fully displayed, and would even go show the principal. It's not the guns. Suicide up 253% since 1963. In fact, it's gone from the 12th leading cause of death. It's now third in young people, which shouldn't surprise anybody in this room, because if you take away God, you are taking away what? Their hope. Child abuse up 2,300%. Again, no big surprise. You tell people that they came from animals, guess what they're going to act like? Illegal drug use is up 6,000%. Again, people trying to fill a void. But let me give you the real report card that nobody's talking about, and that is, since we have taken God out of the picture, since we have injected this godless theory, the United States has become the world leader in violent crime, divorce rate, teenage pregnancy, illegal drug use, and we've got the highest illiteracy rate of any industrial nation. Now, that's not Brad's opinion. Those are the facts. In fact, the best way for me to try to get it across to you is this. If I could put everybody in this room on a time machine, and I could fly us back to the year 1960, and we go down a hallway of a school, and we open one of the classroom doors, we go inside, and we ask the teacher just one question. What's your biggest complaint? What's your biggest problem? They actually did this survey back then. Take a look at the top two answers. Talking and chewing gum. Now here's what we're going to do. We're going to get everybody back on that time machine. We're going to come to the present, 2024. And we're going to go down to the local high school. Actually, first, you're going to have to check in. You can't just walk in. You may have to go through metal detector. But let's say we get in. We go down the hallway. We ask the teacher that same exact question. Is there anybody in this room that honestly believes talking and chewing gum are going to be the top two answers? They've been doing this survey for years now. Take a look at some of the top answers that are given today. Now, folks, please do not miss this point right here. You take a 16-year-old child from 1960, and you take a 16-year-old child from today, anatomically, they're exactly the same. So then what's changed? I'll tell you what's changed. It's what we're putting in right up here, and it's our attitude towards God. In fact, I tell people, you can't have a true north on your moral compass when you take God out of the picture. And again, you say, okay, well, But, you know, Brett, how does that affect us today? If you've got your Bibles with you, very quickly, I want to share with you something to think about. Another quick history lesson. Deuteronomy chapter 8. Moses is warning the people not to forget God. Remember, they're about to go in and take over that promised land. And he says, beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments, his judgments, his statutes, which I command you today. What happened? Well, let's think about it. In the book of Deuteronomy, we find Moses dying. Leadership is handed off to a guy named Joshua. Remember, they set up the memorial stones in Joshua chapter 4. God gives them judges. Did they want judges? What they want? They wanted to be like the other people, the nations of the world, right? God says, you don't want a king. You have a king, your kids are going to serve the king. He's going to take the best of your land. You know what they said? Give us a king. Very good. And if I were to mention to you names like Saul, David, Solomon, they ring a bell. Remember who came after Solomon? It was a guy named Rehoboam, his son. And it was actually under Rehoboam that those 12 tribes actually split into a divided kingdom. 10 of them went north. They formed the nation of Israel. They had 19 kings in succession. Every single one of them was evil. So bad that God had to send men like Elijah, Isaiah to try to call them back. And yet, most of you know, 722 BC, they were given over to the Assyrians. All right, what about the other two remaining tribes? Benjamin, Judah. They formed the nation of Judah. They also had 19 kings, most of which were evil. They did have a couple of good ones in there. But here's what you read. As you're reading through 1st and 2nd Kings, Chronicles, you read these phrases where they didn't tear down the high places. They kept allowing idolatry. God sent men to call them back. And yet, 606 BC, they were given over to the Babylonians. Now, these were God-chosen people in his chosen land. You say, okay, well, what's the big deal? Well, take a look. It took about 213 years for the nation of Israel, 349 for Judah, to be given over to the Assyrians, to the Babylonians. I think the only reason that Judah lasted a little bit longer, they did have a few good leaders in there. But when you look at those two time periods, ask yourself this question. How old is the United States of America? I'll give you a hint. We declared our independence in 1776. We fall quite literally right between those two periods. Well, then a really good question to ask as a follow-up would be, all right, what determines the course of a nation? Now, let me tell you, you go home tonight, you turn on your evening news, and you can hear all about things like the economy, Middle East, gun control, Social Security, healthcare, all these hot-button issues. Well, let me ask you, if Jesus Christ comes back tomorrow, how many of those things matter? None of them. I'm going to make one or two of you upset. Not even Social Security. You want to know what determines the course of a nation, folks? It is our reverence and obedience to Almighty God. That's it. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Does it matter whether or not we have morals and teach character to folks? Oh yeah, because nations rise and fall. And folks, God will only put up with it for so long. Amen. I do appreciate very, very much your attention this morning. I almost got through my introduction. We will get ready for worship together. Thank you very much.